Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. People who've gotten their bosses fired. How? Part 2. About 13 to 14 years ago, I was working as a web designer for a .com. In our immediate group were a creative director, a creative manager, and two of us who were designers, and we were all part of the marketing department. The creative director was a joke. Brought in by the previous VP of marketing who he was friends with, he hardly did any work himself and just played online poker waiting on us to send him things for approval. And he'd never stick around late when the rest of us needed to stay late to hit a deadline or deal with a crisis, etc. The creative manager, who'd been in charge for a couple years before the creative director's hiring, still ran the day-to-day. So the creative manager gave his notice that he'd accepted a new job, and when I met with the current VP of marketing to discuss transition, I mentioned that the creative director would need to step up and pull his weight. I guess a similar message was expressed by a number of people, and less than a week after the creative manager's last day, the creative director was fired. This kind of sucked because we went down from 4 to 2 people in our group. I was appointed acting creative manager, and we eventually did hire one more designer. I left the company a couple months later too, after the latest VP of marketing was let go and there was going to be a 10th different person overseeing marketing in my 5 years there. And the a-hole creative director? He'd reached out at some point looking for files for his portfolio, I think, and it happened to be in the 2-week window where I'd accepted my next job but hadn't yet started, so I mentioned my new position. Well, he fires off a copy of his resume to the company president and tried to poach my new job out from under me. On my first day at the new job, the president mentioned that somebody else from that same company also applied for the job and forwarded me the application email to see if I knew him. Saw that the date was after he and I last communicated. I took a phone call on my cell when at my desk. Middle manager came up and screamed at me, yelling about how I was not allowed to take calls for clients while at that office. I was a contractor and made it perfectly clear that I did work for multiple clients prior to doing work for this company. The CTO's office was 10 feet from mine. He came out and stood in his doorway listening to the rant. When the middle manager was done, I just looked over at the CTO and said, "It's him or me, and at the moment, I don't give an F which you pick." CTO walked the middle manager out right then. Funny thing, I didn't hang up throughout the incident, and it was my wife on the other end. I was spending about 70 hours a week at their site digging their staff out of a hole they had dug themselves in. I left my last company due to a bully of a GM. Many people were leaving over him causing problems, being sexist, racist, doing things people could easily sue them for claiming as harassment. List goes on. Everyone informed HR during their exit interviews. He even tried to make my exit interview not happen. Though they still weren't doing anything. I had been at my new job for a couple months now and was still getting complaints from my old team almost daily. So I made an email account named Concerned Company Name Crew, sent an email to everyone who had an email account within the company explaining what he did/still did with events spanning from his start to the day prior. They fired him within the week and my old crew thanked me. Basically said, I'm quitting because of X. Boss looked at me and said, "Can I convince you to delay this by a week?" Worked from home for a week, then X was gone. Worked there for 5 more years, then 7 at the company that acquired us. Our desks were separated by a 5-foot cubicle wall. He was under the mistaken impression that it totally blocked sound. Thus, I got to hear all his loud phone conversations, primarily his booty calls, including those with his boss's fiancée. I figured it was none of my business and tried to ignore it. Well, there was a position in another department that I was interested in, and as per procedure, I handed in an application to my talkative boss. Didn't hear anything further, and followed up a couple of days later, only to be told that something must have happened to the application. Filled out another one, and handed it in. As I return to my desk, I hear the boss on the phone with a friend laughing about how he had just trashed my application again, and how he was never going to let go of me. I go to boss's boss and angrily offer my resignation, telling him what I had just overheard, explaining that I was constantly hearing his phone calls, like his booty calls with woman's name and boss's boss's fiance's name. He got very quiet and told me to go back to my desk and he'll take care of everything. The next day, I come in and boss is gone. The day after, I have an interview with the other department. Got the position. I tend to avoid office drama, but really, he should have stuck to screwing his boss's fiancé and not tried to screw me as well. One summer, I volunteered to help a conservation society in East Africa. The aim of the project was to educate the local rural population about poaching and to get them to help us stop it from the ground up. Anyway, I was staying with the lead ranger and his family, and on numerous occasions, he served us meat that I'm 100% sure was poached. He tried to tell me that it was pork, but it was dark and gamey with lots of small bones. I think it was small antelope like dik-dik or duiker. When I returned to Nairobi, I mentioned to my grandpa, his boss's boss, that we'd eaten some odd meals. He investigated and found out that my boss had a poacher friend who was selling him illegal meat. He was fired. I didn't feel guilty. Poaching is awful. I kept a detailed log of both our times in and out of the office, as well as a detailed list of my work efforts. When I was called into HR to be fired, I produced the logs. I was given their position at the request of a former manager after HR fired my boss. Not my direct boss, but the new VP of our department. Everyone hated him and the poorly thought through changes he was threatening to implement. A lot of my coworkers were talking about looking for other jobs. Our manager at the time, my direct boss, was really inexperienced and had no idea how to handle the situation. I was only a year out of college and didn't know what to do. But I was openly gay, as was the VP of a different department. We were the only two openly gay people at the company at the time, so we chatted a bit. I went to his office and said, I don't know if you have any influence on my department, but we're going to lose half our team if someone doesn't do something about this guy, and I didn't know who else to come to. He asked me to have anyone else in the department who felt the same way come talk to him. I spread the word, and there were plenty of takers. A few days later, we all saw my department's VP have a private meeting with the CEO. After that meeting, he announced that he wasn't going to make the changes he'd been talking about. He then proceeded to do absolutely nothing for the next month because it turned out that if he couldn't lead the department in a top-down authoritarian style, he genuinely didn't know what else to do. He was fired at the end of that month. Apparently, the gay agenda is improving working conditions for everyone. You're welcome. He was such a BSer, all talk. He yells at me one day for failing to do some task, which got done anyway because someone got a hold of my boss. They only needed a mailing address I forgot to give them. Meanwhile, he's over at his buddy's house looking at his new boat. Peed me off, so I called his boss and told him all the work that gets done out of this office is me. 'Twas a long talk with him, but Big Boss said he had a feeling that was what was going on. This obviously wasn't the first time my boss was slacking off, but him giving me S when he wasn't even in the office was the camelback straw. Boss didn't get fired, but left shortly after. It was an awkward couple of weeks. Big Boss ended up writing me a nice recommendation letter when I changed positions. Not fired, but demoted. I got fired and explained in my exit interview how the reason I wasn't making progress on my project is that I had no idea what I was doing. I was never trained, my WFH boss in another location took off for 4 hours a day to run errands and go to the gym, etc., etc. They checked my story out and ended up demoting my boss, taking her off the project, and taking away all her direct reports. Not me, but my girlfriend at the time. We were both working at a small burrito chain. She was front of house manager and I was kitchen manager. Above us was one senior manager and then the owner. We did tip pooling based on hours, and the senior manager always told my girlfriend not to count the tips every night as he divided it up at the end of the week. Well, of course she counted them every night. Turns out, senior manager was stealing almost $500 a week from employees in tips, and because his previous FOH manager never questioned him, it had likely been going on for years. She told the owners, and he was gone the next day. A week later, his wife left him. Public agency hires someone out of private industry at the vice president level. she immediately begins hiring all her cronies and A-kissers from her old job at very nice salaries for jobs that didn't previously exist. That's the sort of corruption we're all used to in North Carolina, so no biggie so far. But she runs out of slots she can just create with a little paperwork, so she starts to bully people in order to get them to quit so she can fill their jobs with her friends. One job was that of executive assistant, and she was pretty harsh on the woman who had that job. I witnessed some of this and told the assistant to take it to HR, which she did, and HR just told her to document everything. So she did, and one day the VP caught her recording a yell fest on her phone. The VP wanted to know what was up, so the exec assistant told her that HR wanted documentation and that I told her how to record conversations on a cell phone, which was legal by the way, I checked. So she yells at the exec assistant, yells at me, then gets on the phone to HR, yelling at them that they were a bunch of incompetent fools and that she wanted to know what kind of Mickey Mouse outfit she was working for if she couldn't fire whoever the F she wanted to fire. Now, we all know there are 3 TRVTHS in life. 1. No tugging on Superman's cape. 2. No land wars in Asia. 3. Don't pee off HR. Sure enough, HR initiates an investigation that took 300 hours of interviews with everyone in the department and a board of inquiry headed up by a senior VP. She was called to the senior VP's office at 4:30 in the afternoon, and when we came to work at 8 the next morning, her office was cleared out. Most of the cronies she hired were gone with a couple of months. No one wanted to work with them, so with no projects on their docket, they knew the writing was on the wall. When the last of the cronies left, her job was eliminated and her staff transferred elsewhere. It was like the evil VP and her mob never existed. If you want to watch the part 1, click a link here. Guys, thank you for all the support and the likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.